The Galactic Concord had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and in all that time, they had never once failed to conquer a species they had set their sights upon. Their empire stretched across 900 worlds, each one taken by force or threat of force. And their fleets were legendary throughout the known universe, so when their long-range sensor stations detected strange radio signals coming from a small blue planet in a backwater spiral arm of the galaxy, the High Council did not feel concern or curiosity. They felt only the familiar hunger of expansion. High Admiral Kethfor of the Third Judgment Fleet received his orders on a quiet morning aboard his flagship. The Divine Certainty. The message was simple and direct. As all Concord military communications were a primitive species have been discovered broadcasting signals into space, revealing their location to anyone with the technology to listen. They were to be integrated into the Empire, their world claimed. Their people put to work serving their new masters. Kefir read the intelligence reports with mild interest. The species called themselves humans, and they lived on a planet they named Earth. They had only recently discovered how to leave their own world, and their technology was laughably primitive by Concord standards. Their fastest ships took months to travel between planets, while Concord vessels could cross the same distance in hours. They had no energy shields, no plasma weapons, no faster-than-light communication. They were, by every measure the Concord used, utterly defenseless. The High Admiral assembled his fleet with the casual confidence of someone who had done this many times before. 3,000 warships gathered in formation, each one carrying enough firepower to reduce a continent to ash. Fighter craft numbered in the hundreds of thousands, and troop transports carried millions of soldiers ready to occupy the conquered world. It was, by any standard, overwhelming force. But the Concord always believed in overwhelming force. They had learned long ago that mercy was weakness and restraint was foolishness. When you conquered a species, you did so completely, leaving no room for resistance or rebellion. Kethfor gave the order to depart, and the Armada began its journey toward the small blue planet called Earth. The journey took 3 standard weeks, and during that time, something unexpected happened. A small human vessel appeared at the edge of Concord's sensor range, broadcasting a request for communication. Kethfor was surprised, but not alarmed. Most species attempted diplomacy when they saw the Judgment Fleet approaching. It never worked, but they always tried. He granted the request. Curious to see what these humans looked like, the view screen flickered to life, and Kethfor found himself looking at a creature unlike any he had encountered before. She was small, with brown skin and dark hair pulled back from her face. Her eyes were steady and calm, showing no fear despite facing the greatest military force in the galaxy. She wore a simple uniform of dark blue, and a small metal pin on her chest displayed the symbol of her world. "I am Ambassador Joran Vasquez of the United Earth Government," she said, her voice clear and even. "I request permission to come aboard your vessel and speak with your commander directly." Kethfor made the wet, gurgling sound that served as laughter among his species. This tiny creature wanted to negotiate face to face. The audacity was almost admirable. He granted her request, more out of amusement than any real interest in what she had to say. Her shuttle docked with the Divine Certainty an hour later, and she was escorted through the massive corridors by a squad of armed guards. The ship was designed to intimidate, with towering ceilings and walls lined with the trophies of conquered worlds. Most ambassadors trembled as they walked these halls, their resolve crumbling before they ever reached the command chamber. Ambassador Vasquez did not tremble. She walked with her head high and her steps steady, looking at the trophies with an expression that Kethfor could not quite read when she entered the command chamber, where the High Admiral waited with his senior officers. She stopped in the center of the room and stood at attention. "Thank you for receiving me, High Admiral," she said. Kethfor studied her from his elevated throne. his large amber eyes blinking slowly. She was even smaller in person than she had appeared on the screen, barely reaching the chest of his shortest officer, and yet there was something in her bearing that made him uneasy. Though he could not say why. "You may speak." "Human," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "Tell us why we should not simply destroy your vessel and continue our advance." Vasquez nodded once, as if this was exactly the question she had expected. "I have come to deliver a message from my government," she said. "It is simple, and I will only say it once." She paused, and her eyes met Kethver's directly. "Turn back," she said. "Take your fleet and return to your space. And do not approach Earth again." The chamber erupted in laughter. Officers slapped their scaled hands against their consoles, their gurgling chuckles filling the air. Even Kethver allowed himself a moment of amusement at the sheer absurdity of the statement. "You threaten us?" he asked when the laughter subsided. "You, with your primitive rockets and your fragile little ships, you dare to threaten the Galactic Concord?" "I do not threaten," Vasquez replied, her voice unchanged. "I war. There is no difference." "Human, there is a great difference, Admiral. But I do not expect you to understand it." Kethver leaned forward, his amusement fading into something harder. "We have conquered 900 species," he said. "We have broken empires that span dozens of star systems. And you think your single world can stand against us?" "I think you should turn back," Vasquez said simply. "And if we do not, then you will be destroyed." The silence that followed was absolute. No one in the chamber had ever heard such words spoken to a Concord admiral. It was beyond arrogance, beyond foolishness. It was madness. Kethver rose from his throne, his full height towering over the small human ambassador. "Your species will make adequate slaves," he said coldly. "We accept your surrender." "We have not surrendered," Vasquez replied. "We have given you a choice. The only choice here is how quickly your world falls. Human, and you have just ensured that we will not be gentle." Vasquez nodded, as if this too was expected. "Then I have delivered my message," she said. "I will return to my shuttle now." She turned and walked toward the door, and Kethver let her go. There was no point in killing a single ambassador when her entire species would soon be enslaved. As she reached the door, she paused and looked back over her shoulder. "One warning," she said. "That is all humanity ever gives, and it is more than we ever gave each other." Then she was gone, escorted back to her shuttle by guards who laughed at her retreating form. Kethver watched her vessel depart on the view screen, a small dot disappearing into the darkness of space. For a moment, just a moment, he felt something cold settle in his chest, but he dismissed it as quickly as it came. They were the Galactic Concord. They had never been defeated, and they never would be. The human ambassador returned to Earth and transmitted a single coded phrase to her government. They chose poorly, and across the solar system, in hidden places that the Concord had never thought to look, humanity began to wake up. The Concord Armada continued its advance toward Earth with the slow, deliberate pace of absolute confidence. There was no need to hurry, no reason to rush. The outcome was already decided in the minds of every officer aboard every ship. This was not a battle. It was a formality. High Admiral Kethver spent the days after the ambassador's departure reviewing what little intelligence they had gathered about humanity. He found it entertaining in a grim sort of way, like reading about animals that did not know they were about to be hunted. The humans had a violent history, filled with wars and conflicts that seemed utterly pointless to Concord's sensibilities. They fought over resources, over ideology, over patches of land on their single world. They had nearly destroyed themselves multiple times, coming close to extinction through their own weapons and their own carelessness. They are like children playing with fire, Admiral Kethver remarked to his second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Threll. They do not even know how lucky they are that we found them before they destroyed themselves. Thrall made a sound of agreement, his scales rippling with amusement. Perhaps we do them a service by conquering them, he said. Under Concord rule, they will finally have peace. Peace through submission, Kethfer agreed. It is the only peace that lasts. The fleet crossed the outer boundary of the human solar system, passing the frozen worlds at its edge without slowing. Sensor officers noted the presence of human satellites and probes scattered throughout the system. Primitive devices that could barely detect the Concord ships, let alone threaten them. They watch us approach, Thrall observed, like prey watching the predator, too frozen with fear to run. But the humans were not frozen as the Concord fleet passed the orbit of the largest gas giant, a planet the humans called Jupiter. Something strange began to happen. Small vessels launched from hidden locations throughout the asteroid belt, appearing on sensors as brief flickers before disappearing again. What is this? Kethfer demanded when the first reports reached him. Unknown contacts. High Admiral, the sensor officer replied, confusion evident in her voice. They appear briefly and then vanish from our screens. And we count perhaps 100 of them so far. 100 ships against 3,000? Kethfer asked, is this their defense force? They do not appear to be attacking, Admiral, and they are moving away from us, dispersing in multiple directions. Thrall leaned forward, studying the tactical display with narrowed eyes. They are running, he said. This must be an evacuation of some kind, carrying their leaders to safety, perhaps. Kethfer considered this for a moment. It made sense in a way. The humans had seen the size of the fleet approaching their world, and they had decided that resistance was impossible. Their leaders were fleeing, abandoning their people to their fate. It was cowardly, but it was not unexpected. Many species had done the same when faced with Concord might. Let them go, Kethfer ordered. We will hunt them down after we have secured their planet, and there is nowhere in this galaxy they can hide from us. The order went out across the fleet, and the Concord ships ignored the fleeing human vessels. It was a decision that would haunt every survivor for the rest of their lives. The human ships continued to scatter, spreading out in a pattern that no one on the Concord side bothered to analyze. They were small and insignificant, barely worth the energy it would take to destroy them. Why waste resources on gnats when there was a world to conquer? Back on Earth, Ambassador Vasquez had returned to the underground command center where humanity's true leaders waited. This was not the gleaming halls of the public government, not the buildings where politicians made speeches and posed for cameras. This was a bunker buried deep beneath a mountain, built decades ago for a war that everyone hoped would never come. General Marcus Chen stood at the center of the command room, surrounded by screens showing every detail of the alien advance. He was a tall man with gray hair and steady hands, chosen for this role because he never panicked and he never hesitated. Around him sat the other members of the Earth Defense Council, representatives from every nation, who had put aside their differences when the first alien signals were detected 3 years ago. They took the bait, Vasquez reported as she entered the room. The Admiral dismissed our warning completely, and they are not pursuing the dispersal ships. Chine nodded, his expression unchanged. We expected arrogance, he said. Everything we learned about the Concord told us they would underestimate us, and they have never faced real resistance before. Colonel Sarah Reyes, the Council's chief strategist, pulled up a holographic display of the solar system. Red dots marked the position of every Concord ship, while blue dots showed the scattered human vessels. The web is almost in position, she said. Another 6 hours and we will have full coverage. And the kinetic packages? Chun asked. Launched 3 months ago, right on schedule. And they will arrive in the target zone within minutes of web activation. Chun looked around the room at the faces of the people who held humanity's fate in their hands. They were scared, all of them. Even if they hid it well, no one knew if this would work. No one knew if anything could stop the force that was coming for their world. But they had prepared for this moment for 3 years. And they had prepared for the possibility of this moment for far longer than that humanity had always known. Somewhere deep in its collective consciousness, that the universe was not friendly. They had looked up at the stars and seen not hope, but danger. Every science fiction story, every nightmare about alien invasion, every paranoid government program building weapons for enemies that might never come, it had all been preparation. Even if no one realized it at the time, the Concord has ruled for 12,000 years, Chun said quietly. They have conquered 900 species, and not one of those species was ready for them. He paused, looking at the red dots advancing steadily toward the small blue marble that was home. We are ready, across the solar system. The 100 human ships that the Concord had dismissed as fleeing refugees continued their careful dance. They were not fleeing, and they were not refugees. Each one carried a device that had taken humanity's greatest minds a decade to build. A device that bent the fundamental forces of the universe in ways that no other species had ever imagined. They spread out in a precise geometric pattern, positioning themselves at exact coordinates that had been calculated years in advance. The Concord sensors noted their positions but saw no threat. The ships were too small to carry significant weapons, too few to pose any danger. They were ignored, just as the human ambassador had been ignored. Just as the warning had been ignored, Admiral Kethfer watched Earth grow larger on his view screen. A beautiful blue and green world covered in white clouds. It would make a fine addition to the Empire. He thought perhaps he would keep a residence there after the conquest, a trophy to remind him of this easy victory. Signal the fleet, he ordered. Begin attack formation and prepare landing forces across 3,000 ships. Crews moved to battle stations with practiced efficiency, weapons powered up, shields activated, and millions of soldiers checked their equipment one final time. The conquest of Earth was about to begin, but in the darkness between worlds, humanity's trap was almost ready to spring. Deep beneath the mountains of what had once been called Switzerland, General Marcus Chen stood before a wall of screens that showed the death of hope and the birth of something new. The command center was silent except for the hum of machines and the soft voices of officers reporting data. Everyone knew what was about to happen, and everyone knew that there was no turning back. 3 years of preparation had led to this single moment. Colonel Sarah Reyes approached Chen with a tablet in her hands. Her face pale but determined. The web is in position, she said. All 100 nodes are reporting green, and the synchronization is perfect. Chen nodded slowly. And the kinetics? 14 minutes from target zone. And they have not been detected. Somewhere above them, far beyond the sky, the Concord Armada was entering attack formation around Earth. 3,000 ships arranged themselves in the classic Concord conquest pattern. A sphere of death that would systematically destroy every defense installation on the planet before the landing troops descended. They had done this 900 times before, and they expected this time to be no different. Chun thought about all the species that had faced this same moment. Throughout the long history of the Concord 900 worlds had seen those ships appear in their skies, and 900 worlds had fallen. Some had surrendered immediately, hoping for mercy that never came. Others had fought with everything they had, throwing their primitive weapons against shields that could not be broken. All of them had lost, but none of them had been human. Tell me again, Chun said quietly to Reyes. Tell me why we are different. Reyes understood the question for what it was. Not doubt, but ritual. They had discussed this many times in the years leading up to this moment. We are different because we expected this, she said. Every species the Concorde has conquered evolved in relative peace. And they reached the stars because they were curious. Because they wanted to explore. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. We reached the stars because we were afraid. And we looked up at the universe and saw threats everywhere, in every shadow, behind every star. And we prepared for enemies we did not know existed. Chun smiled grimly. Paranoia as evolutionary advantage, not paranoia. General, and that is what makes us different. Because we were not imagining dangers that did not exist. We were recognizing a fundamental truth about the universe. And what truth is that? Reyes met his eyes steadily, that the universe does not care about us, that survival is not guaranteed. That everything we love can be taken away in an instant if we are not ready to defend it. Chun turned back to the screens. The Concorde fleet was beautiful in a terrible way. Thousands of ships moving in perfect coordination, like a single organism. They had no idea what was coming. And that ignorance was about to cost them everything. Humanity spent its entire existence fighting itself, Chun said. We invented weapons to kill each other more efficiently. And we built armies and navies and air forces that could destroy the world several times over. He shook his head slowly. Other species would see that as a flaw, as evidence that we are primitive and violent and unworthy of the stars. But it is not a flaw. Reyes said, no, it is not a flaw. It is preparation. Because every weapon we built, every strategy we developed, every paranoid plan for wars that never happened, all of it was waiting for this day. The countdown on the main screen showed 10 minutes until the kinetic packages arrived. 10 minutes until humanity revealed what it had been hiding. Ambassador Vasquez entered the command center. Still wearing the same uniform she had worn aboard the Concorde flagship, she had not slept since returning to Earth. But her eyes were alert and focused. I keep thinking about what the Admiral said, she told Chun. He called us primitive and laughed at her warning. Did you expect anything else? No. But I wanted to be wrong, General, and I wanted them to turn back because part of me hoped that we would not have to do what we are about to do. Chun placed a hand on her shoulder. We gave them a choice. Ambassador, and we did more than any of the 900 species they conquered. More than they have ever done for anyone. One warning, Vasquez said softly. That is all humanity gives. It is more than we ever gave each other. The words hung in the air between them. Heavy with the weight of human history, wars fought over religion, over land, over pride, millions dead because one group of humans decided another group did not deserve to live all that violence, all that bloodshed, and yet here they were, united as never before against a threat from the stars. 5 minutes. Reyes announced the command center grew even more silent as officers stopped their side conversations and focused entirely on their stations on the screens. The Concorde fleet continued its advance. Completely unaware of the trap closing around them, Admiral Kethfor was probably on his flagship right now. Chun thought, preparing his victory speech, planning how he would divide up the conquered world among his officers. He had no idea that his fleet was about to become a debris field. The nodes are charging, an engineer reported. Power levels are optimal across all platforms. Chun watched the blue dots on the display. The 100 small ships that the Concorde had dismissed as fleeing refugees. They were arranged in a perfect sphere around the alien Armada. Each one positioned at precise coordinates, calculated by teams of physicists working in secret for over a decade. The technology they carried had no name, because humanity had never needed to name it before in the classified documents. It was simply called the Web. 3 minutes. Chun looked around the room at the faces of the people who would either save humanity or witness its final moments. They were afraid. All of them, but they did not let that fear control them. Fear was an old friend to humanity, a companion that had walked beside them since the first humans huddled in caves. listening to predators prowl in the darkness outside. Other species had learned to ignore fear, to suppress it as a primitive emotion unworthy of intelligent beings. Humans had learned to use it. 2 minutes. Somewhere in the asteroid belt, massive tungsten rods that had been launched 3 months ago were approaching their final trajectory. They were simple weapons, almost laughably primitive compared to the plasma cannons and antimatter bombs of the Concorde fleet. Just metal, accelerated to a significant fraction of the speed of light, carrying more kinetic energy than nuclear weapons. The Concorde sensors had not detected them because the Concorde had never thought to look for such things. Why would anyone use solid projectiles when energy weapons were so much more efficient? 1 minute. Chun took a deep breath. Activate the web, he ordered, across the solar system. 100 human ships began to glow with power that had never been seen before in this part of the galaxy. And in the command center, humanity held its breath. Admiral Kethfer felt his flagship shudder, and for a moment he thought they had struck some piece of debris. Then the lights went out. Emergency lighting flickered on a second later, casting the command chamber in a dim red glow that made everything seem wrong, and unfamiliar officers shouted in confusion, their hands moving across control panels that no longer responded. Report. Kethfer bellowed, rising from his throne as alarms began to wail throughout the ship. Admiral, we have lost main power. Someone shouted back. Engines are offline. Weapons are offline. Shields are down. What hit us? Nothing hit us, Admiral, but something has happened to every electrical system on the ship. Everything has simply stopped working. Kethfer felt cold fear grip his heart. For the first time in his long career, he had faced enemies before, had fought in battles where his ship took damage and his crew died around him, but he had never experienced anything like this. Never felt his vessel become dead and helpless in the span of a single heartbeat. Is it just us? He demanded. The communications officer was frantically working his console, trying to get any response from the equipment. I am receiving emergency signals from across the fleet, Admiral, and every ship is reporting the same thing. Complete system failure. 3,000 ships, the greatest armada in Concorde history, had all gone dark at exactly the same moment. Kethfer staggered to the viewport and stared out at the scene before him. Ships drifted without power, their running lights extinguished, their weapons cold and silent. Some were spinning slowly out of control, their stabilizers no longer functioning. Others had collided in the confusion, their hulls crumpling together without shields to protect them. It was impossible. It was a nightmare made real. The view screen crackled to life, somehow still functioning despite everything else being dead. And Kethfer found himself looking at a human face. It was not the ambassador who had delivered the warning. This was a man, older, with gray hair and eyes that held no mercy and no hesitation. Admiral Kethfer, the human said. My name is General Marcus Chun of the United Earth Defense Command, and I want you to understand what has happened to your fleet. Kethfer could only stare in shock as the human continued. You are currently inside what we call a Faraday exclusion field. And it is technology that your species has never encountered because no other species has ever invented it. And every electrical system in your fleet has been neutralized. Permanently, your ships are tombs now. That is impossible. Kethfer managed to say, such technology does not exist. It did not exist, Chun agreed. We invented it, specifically for this moment. Specifically for you, or rather, not for you exactly because we did not know you existed when we began this project. The general leaned forward slightly, and something in his eyes made Kethfer step back involuntarily. We invented it for whoever came. Admiral, because we always knew someone would. Because we looked at the universe and saw the truth that every other species missed, and we prepared. You cannot defeat us. Kethfer shouted, trying to find some shred of the confidence that had defined his entire life. Even without power, we have millions of soldiers. We have resources. We will repair our systems and we will destroy you. No, Chun said simply, you will not. And then Kethver saw them through the viewport. Bright streaks of light were appearing against the backdrop of stars. Hundreds of them, thousands of them, coming from every direction. They moved too fast to track, faster than anything Kethver had ever seen. And they were heading directly for his helpless fleet. Those are kinetic impactors, Chun explained, his voice calm and even tungsten rods, nothing more. Launched from hidden platforms 3 months ago and timed to arrive at this exact moment. And they are traveling at 12% of the speed of light. Kethver watched in horror as the first impacts began. A cruiser near the edge of the formation simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, and the next it was an expanding cloud of debris. Then another ship was hit. And another, and another. The impacts came faster and faster, each one destroying a vessel that had no shields. No defenses, no way to even move out of the path of destruction. The flagship shook as nearby. Explosions sent shockwaves through space officers screamed and ran for escape pods that had no power to launch. Kethver stood frozen at the viewport, watching his entire fleet being systematically dismantled. You were warned, Chun said from the view screen. Ambassador Vasquez came to you and told you to turn back. And she told you what would happen if you did not listen. We did not believe her, Kethver whispered. No, you did not believe her, because you have never faced a species like us before. You have only conquered worlds that evolved in peace, worlds that reached for the stars out of curiosity and hope. Chun paused as another wave of impacts lit up the darkness. Humanity did not evolve in peace, Admiral, and we did not reach for the stars because we hoped to find friends. We reached for the stars because we knew, we absolutely knew, that somewhere out there were things that wanted to destroy us. How? Kethver asked, his voice broken. How could you know? Because that is what we would do, Chun replied. Because we have spent our entire existence fighting each other, preparing for enemies, building weapons. And all of that preparation, all of that violence and paranoia, it was waiting for this day. The flagship lurched as something struck its outer hull. Not a direct hit, but close enough to send tremors through the entire vessel. Kethver fell to his knees, his legs no longer able to support him. You have killed us all, he said. We gave you a choice, Admiral, and you chose to ignore it. And now you will serve as a message to the rest of your empire. The view screen showed a tactical display of what remained of the Concorde fleet, where 3,000 ships had been. There were now barely 300, and the kinetic bombardment was still ongoing. Ships exploded in silence, their crews never knowing what hit them, never having a chance to fight back or flee or even understand what was happening. Some of your vessels will survive, Chun continued. We have calculated the bombardment to leave witnesses. Enough of your people to return home and tell the Galactic Concorde what happened here today. Why? Kethver asked. Why leave anyone alive? Because we want your empire to know, Admiral. And we want every species in your Concorde to understand what they are dealing with. The general stood. And behind him, Kethver could see other humans watching. Their faces grim but satisfied. Humanity does not seek conquest. We do not want your worlds or your resources. We only want to be left alone. But if anyone comes for us again, if anyone threatens our home, we will not stop at destroying fleets. Chun leaned close to the screen, his voice dropping to something that was almost a whisper. We will end civilizations, Admiral, and we are very, very good at it. The transmission ended, leaving Kethver alone in the dying light of his flagship. Surrounded by the screams of his crew, and the silence of his destroyed armada outside the viewport. The kinetic impacts finally slowed and then stopped of the 3,000 ships that had entered the human solar system. Fewer than 200 remained intact, and those survivors would carry a message back to the Galactic Concord, a message written in the wreckage of the mightiest fleet ever assembled. Humanity was awake, and humanity was dangerous. 3 standard weeks after the destruction of the Third Judgment Fleet, Ambassador Yorin Vasquez stood before the Grand Senate of the Galactic Concord. The journey to the Concord homeworld had been tense. Her small diplomatic vessel escorted by warships that kept their weapons powered and ready. They were afraid of her. These ancient beings who had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. And they were right to be afraid. The Senate chamber was the largest enclosed space Vasquez had ever seen. A dome of crystal and metal that could have held a small city. Thousands of senators sat in tiered rows that rose toward the distant ceiling. Representatives from hundreds of species that had been conquered and absorbed into the Zeus Concord over millennia. They watched her in silence. As she walked to the speaker's platform at the center of the chamber, behind her, a holographic display flickered to life, showing the debris field that had once been the mightiest armada in galactic history. Vasquez let them look at it for a long moment before she spoke. 3,000 ships, she said, her voice amplified to reach every corner of the vast chamber. Your finest warriors, your most advanced technology, your pride and your power, all of it gone in 11 hours. The senators stirred uneasily in their seats. Many of them had lost relatives in the fleet. Sons and daughters and siblings who had served aboard those ships. They had been told that the mission would be easy, that the primitive humans would fall like all the others. Now they stared at the wreckage of that arrogance. We did not want this, Vasquez continued. My government sent me to your flagship with one simple message, and all I asked was that you turn back. She looked up at the senators, her eyes moving across the alien faces that surrounded her. One warning, that is all humanity ever gives. And it is more than we have ever given each other. A senator rose from his seat. A tall being with gray scales and cold black eyes, Vasquez recognized him from the intelligence briefings as Supreme Chancellor Vorth, the leader of the Concord Senate. You speak of warnings and choices, Vorth said, his voice like grinding stones, but you have committed an act of war against the Galactic Concord. And do you truly believe that we will let this stand? I believe you will do whatever you think is best for your empire. Chancellor, then you should know that we have more fleets, more soldiers, more resources than your single world could ever hope to match. And if we choose to send them all against you, you will fall. Vasquez nodded slowly, as if this was exactly what she had expected to hear. You are correct, Chancellor. And your empire has the numbers to overwhelm us if you are willing to pay the price. She touched a control on her wrist, and the holographic display changed. Now it showed Earth, the small blue planet that had defied the Concord. But overlaid on the image were hundreds of red markers scattered throughout the solar system. These are weapons platforms, Vasquez explained. Hidden in asteroids, buried on moons, drifting in the darkness between worlds. And each one carries enough firepower to destroy a fleet. The display zoomed out, showing the space around Earth in greater detail. The red markers multiplied, thousands of them, tens of thousands. A defensive network that had been decades in the making. We built these because we knew this day would come, Vasquez said. Not specifically you, not the Concord, but someone. Because we looked at the universe and understood that we were not safe, that we would never be safe, and that the only way to survive was to be too dangerous to attack. Chancellor Vorth's scales had turned a paler shade of gray, but his voice remained steady, impressive. But even this network cannot protect you forever. And we can wait, we can build, we can plan. Yes, you can, Vasquez agreed. But you should know something about the attack on your fleet. She paused, letting the silence stretch. We held back. The chamber erupted in noise. Senators shouting and demanding explanations. Vasquez waited for the uproar to subside before continuing. The kinetic bombardment was calculated to leave survivors, to leave witnesses who could return home and tell you what happened. And we could have destroyed every ship, could have left no one alive. But we chose not to. She let that sink in, and the weapons we used, the exclusion field and the kinetic impactors, those are not our most powerful tools. They are simply the ones we decided to reveal. You are bluffing, Vorth said. But there was uncertainty in his voice now. Am I? Vasquez asked. You have studied humanity. Chancellor, you have read our history. You know what we are capable of. She turned to address the entire Senate, her voice rising. We are a species that invented nuclear weapons and then used them against ourselves. We are a species that created biological agents capable of wiping out entire populations. We are a species that designed computer viruses that could crash the infrastructure of civilization. Her eyes were hard as she continued. Everything we ever built to destroy each other is now pointed outward. Chancellor, and you have no idea what we are hiding. You have no idea what we can do if we decide that our survival requires your extinction. The chamber was silent now. Thousands of beings staring at the small human who spoke of extinction as calmly as others might discuss the weather. But we do not want extinction, Vasquez said, her voice softening slightly. We do not want war. We do not want conquest. We only want to be left alone. She looked directly at Chancellor Vorth. The Concord has a choice to make. You can attempt revenge. You can send more fleets and more soldiers. You can try to overwhelm us through sheer numbers, and maybe you will succeed. Maybe you will destroy our world. She paused. But you will pay a price that will echo through your empire for generations. You will lose millions, perhaps billions, and you will learn that humanity does not surrender, does not yield, does not give up even when all hope is gone. Or, Vorth asked, or you can choose peace. You can be the first species in your empire's history to recognize that conquest is no longer profitable. That somewhere in this galaxy, there is now a species that will always fight back and will make you bleed for every inch. Vasquez took a step toward the Chancellor's seat, her posture straight and her eyes unwavering. We are not your enemy. Chancellor, we do not want your worlds or your resources or your power. We just want to exist, to grow, to explore the stars in our own time and in our own way. She spread her hands. Leave us alone, and we will leave you alone. That is all we ask. The silence stretched for a long moment as the Senate considered her words. Finally, Chancellor Vorth rose from his seat and descended the steps to stand before her. He was twice her height and 3 times her mass. A predator facing prey that had suddenly grown teeth. And if we choose war? He asked quietly. Vasquez met his gaze without flinching. Then there will be no second warning. Chancellor, and when it is over, either humanity will be gone, or the Concord will be a memory. She turned and walked toward the chamber doors, her footsteps echoing in the silence at the threshold. She paused and looked back at the thousands of senators who held the fate of their empire in their hands. Choose wisely, she said, for all our sakes. Then she was gone, leaving the Galactic Concord to contemplate a universe that had suddenly become far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. And somewhere, far across the stars, humanity waited to see what the future would bring. They had given their warning. Now they would see if the universe had learned to listen.